In the last episode, I said one of the first things the brain does when it tries to interpret the world is to detect edges. And I gave an example of how to sketch an edge. So here I'm just sketching the edges of something essential to every portrait, and that is the lips. Now, as you can see, this is the outline of a lips, and often when we think of the edges of an object or a thing, we associate those edges with the outline. Now, this is very different than how the brain interprets edges. To the brain, the edges are created by boundaries of contrast. So in the lips, the largest boundary of value contrast occurs in the corners of the lips. And where the two lips meet, it's another harsh contrast. Now, because the light almost always shines down from above onto the lips, there's generally a shadow created below them, and that creates another boundary of contrast. Because the upper lip is a slightly different color and value when compared to the surrounding skin, creates another edge of contrast. Now, these edges, as the brain interprets them, they don't always have to be black on white contrast or black on something else. It doesn't always have to be the darkest points of contrast. For example, the lower lip almost always has a reflection, and that creates a contrast. Now, originally when we had this edges sketched in, we would have a line going through here saying that's the boundary of the lips, that is the edge of the lips. Now, most of the time, because of value and shadowing, it's actually quite subtle. There is not a discernible edge, not an edge of value in this region of the lips. Of course, a woman wearing a lot of lipstick, there would be a harsh edge, but in the natural state, very subtle change in value. So the edges that we think of, the outline edges, are actually something quite different than the edges as the brain interprets them. Now, because sight is so integral into how we perceive reality, it's often difficult to remember that sight is just another sense, like touching or smelling. And it's important to remember the sensual aspect of sight to draw. We get into the habit of labeling and naming things, and when learning to draw, we tend to think of the world according to these labels. These are lips, but according to the brain, this is nothing more than values and shapes. To see the difference between what we think are edges and what the brain interprets as an edge, I'm going to use this photograph and the help of a computer. I want you to think to yourself what it would look like if you were to draw the outlines of this face and the various features such as the eyes and the lips. If you want to, you can even pause the video right now and quickly do a drawing. Now I want you to pay particularly close attention to the left side of this picture, where one would assume there should be an outline or an edge of the jawline, but you can't see it because it's lost in a very dark shadow. Now take a look at this picture after it's been run through a popular Photoshop filter called Find Edges. This gives you an idea of what the brain is doing as it senses these edges. It's sensing what I like to call value shapes. That's the next level of how the brain sees, is it's grouping these edges into shapes of value. Now these aren't shapes like triangles or squares or circles. These are very indescribable shapes. But if you can begin to recognize and see these value shapes, it'll make drawing what you see much easier. To help to learn to see value shapes, I put together a set of 4 exercises, and they're very easy. Just print them out on your printer. You can find the address here, or there'll be a link over there on YouTube. I'm going to start the first one here with you. Now, we're going to be using these exercises in the next episode too, building upon what we start here. So it's very important that you actually have your paper laid out with a bounding box that's 8 by 10 inches. Now, you can either measure it out, or just a real quick way, if you don't feel like doing that, just lay your paper over the top of it and mark the corners off of it. Grab your ruler and just connect the lines. Okay, so now we have these laid out. Now if we look at this exercise, it's real blurry, hard to make out any value shapes. And this is done intentionally because in the future we're going to be actually refining and drawing on top of the exercise we already started. But as a starting point, what we're looking for is roughly areas that have a similar value. And I'm just going to draw on this, and I see a shape that looks something roughly like this. Now everything inside this shape has a value, say equal to value of 5 or higher. So everything is either inside here is either 5 or darker. Now I'm just going to set this aside. Now, the reason we're getting a rough value here is that we want to start out lighter. So we can either kind of just sketch in this shape, or you could just start shading it in. Now, because it has a value of 5 or lighter, what we want to do is fill it in, shift it just a little lower. We want to fill in this shape with, say, a value of 4. Now, you'll see why this is important later on. But just to start out, get this shape kind of started in.